So, I'm sorry, I've been busy. I am creating a base course and I'm also studying a doctorate and I'm also gigging and I'm also teaching at two universities and teaching privately. So that's my excuse. But here I am with another bass lesson. Now, I wanted to just get straight to the point, ad lib, hopefully I can explain this thing. What really frustrates me about music education is everything's always rote learnt. People say, okay, these are the scales, these are the modes, but they never put it into historical context. And I understand why with little kids, you probably just need to go, look, just trust me. But for anyone a bit older or for inquiring minds, I actually think that following the historical narrative actually really helps justify music theory and make it make sense and help pennies drop in people's brains. For example, before the 1600s, I mean, I'm not a super expert on early European music, but overall things were modal, and they were modal in a way that's very different to how we think of modality now. There wasn't this tonal center or reinforcing of a tonic on a harmonic level. It was more of a linear melodic idea of a tonic or a final, a single note. More similar to the way Indian classical music use ragas and such. I'm probably sounding like an idiot now. But the point is, before the 1600s, we weren't thinking in tonal harmony. Harmonic constructs had started to emerge, and that's what led to it. So what happened? From the 1600s onwards, we had this idea that you could take any scale and create a series of chords based off each note of the scale by tuning in thirds. What happens then is that two of the modes in particular, the Ionian and the Aeolian, that's the major and the minor scale, they tonicize much more easily. So these scales become the home chord as opposed to just a note and even more than just a scale. Now, what happened was, when they did this with the major scale, it worked really well because the fifth chord of the major scale is a dominant chord, and the dominant to tonic function is a really strong tonicizing sound. Let me grab my bass and demonstrate. Let's say we're in the key of C major, to pick an obvious one. Now the fifth chord is going to be a G7. And yes, in classical music they did use G7. So that sound is constantly reinforcing the tonic. So you can almost think of like the tonic and the dominant as being opposites. The tonic is stable and unmoving, or doesn't have to move, and the dominant almost wants to irresistibly resolve back to the tonic. Now there's lots of variations on that, but that's the backbone of tonal harmony to an extent. So the issue with doing it in minor is that fifth chord, so if we're in A minor, the fifth chord is going to be in E minor, right? Which, while it has a descending fifth resolving back to the A, it lacks the dense chromatic voice leading of a dominant chord. It sounds like this. You know? Whereas the dominant sounds like this. Yeah? So what they started to do was they invented this scale called the harmonic minor. And that was made so that the fifth chord would have the leading tone. Okay? Now what's really interesting is, in jazz history, which is kind of like a microcosm of classical music history, what took hundreds and hundreds of years in classical music took just like 50 years in jazz music. They went from improvising contrapuntally around bass lines and melodies to then like Louis Armstrong and these early jazz pioneers started improvising around chord structures more as an abstract concept. And then obviously in bebop, Charlie Parker and these people took that to the extreme, where they're really navigating the upper partials of chords and using chromaticism in between. That's where you get those real interweaving bebop melodies. But then what happened was modal jazz. And modal jazz is really important because it's not modal harmony in the way that modal harmony existed in Europe before the 1600s. It's modal harmony informed by tonal thinking, tonal harmony. What happens is that there's this realization that a horizontal scale is also a chord. And the best way I can explain it is if we go back to that dominant tonic function in a minor key. The classical common practice period musician thinks, okay, I'm using A harmonic minor. So the fifth diatonic chord of A harmonic minor is E7, not E minor 7. And that gives me that leading tone that goes back to the, right? But the jazz musician thinks, let's inject this function we want. What's the chord scale? The E7 chord scale, where there's a long list. In minor harmony, you'd probably be thinking like a half whole scale. So you'd be... So I haven't played yet today, my hands are a bit... But, so they're thinking, let's insert that function into the harmony. Whereas the classical musician of the common practice period is thinking, let's use this underlying scale to get that harmony. And the best way I can demonstrate that, even though it's a bit of an anachronism, because this song was written before what I'm talking about, but Stella by Starlight. If you think of the melody of Stella by Starlight, it's B flat major. All those notes are from B flat major. But the very first chord is an E half diminished, or E minor 7 flat 5. Now, to the person using the same way of thinking that the common practice classical musicians were thinking, you could think, okay, let's use the B flat major scale, but instead of that perfect fourth, the E flat, we're going to use an E natural and kind of create this sort of modular, this hybrid scale using the chord tones of E half diminished. And, you know, add the extra notes using the B flat major scale. And it just so happens that works, right? You end up with a Locrian scale. But you're missing out on the point, which is that it's about the function, and chord scale thinking would open up a new pathway and let you know that you could also use other functionally related options like the Locrian natural 2, which is a melodic minor. In kind, the A7 flat 9. I mean, if you're trying to think B flat major and just adding the alternate chord tones, it gets pretty goofy. Whereas if you understand that that's a diminished harmony, that's a flat, that's a half whole scale by default, and then you could also use like the fifth mode of harmonic minor. It's a whole different way of thinking. So that's kind of like a quick portal into the way I think when I educate people this way, what I'm putting into my bass course, and also an explanation of the difference between jazz harmony thinking post-1950s versus how it's often taught to people, which is like, here's the key, here are the chords, go. You know, so I hope that makes a bit more sense. All right, I'm going to edit this video. It's probably not 4 minutes. I'm giving up trying to make them 4 minutes long. If it's 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes. Let's just call on PW Farrell's bass lessons again. Can we just let's just do that. All right, peace. I hope you're having a great day. Bye.